Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hopefully you guys are all doing well out there, staying safe in Corona land. I know it's pretty crazy out there. Even here in Illinois, we've recently gotten our stay-at-home orders were extended another 30 days into the end of May. So trying to do the best that I can here. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different than what I usually discuss. And that's going to be some Canon gear and rumors and an upcoming camera from Canon, and that's the EOS R5. So if you haven't noticed, I don't know how you haven't, but it seems like on all the photography websites, the Facebook groups, wherever, a lot of people are talking about this camera. There's been a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz, and a lot of hype. There's been some features released or some specs released about this camera from Canon that definitely have a lot of people's attention. And along with that, I've been seeing a lot of people leaving comments in comment sections on other videos, and again in Facebook groups, where they're basically saying that this is going to be a Sony killer, that it's going to put Sony out of business. Everybody who switched over to Sony over the last couple of years away from Canon is going to come back to Canon now because this camera is just so amazing. And to me, honestly, like, that got my attention, and so I decided to dig a little bit deeper into this Canon EOS R5 and see really if there's any merit into what people are saying about this. So we're going to dive into this camera a little bit, talk about some of the specs that we do know are going to be included in this camera when it does finally get released from Canon, and just talk through it and see, is this really something that's really going to put Nikon and Sony and Fuji and all the other camera brands out of business. So let's dive into some of the specifics about the camera. So first things first, the EOS R5, what is it? It's going to be Canon's new flagship mirrorless camera. It's basically going to be the mirrorless equivalent of something like a Canon 5D Mark IV, and it's a camera that a lot of Canon users have been waiting for really at least the last 2 to 3 years. I know when I switched from Sony, I was definitely hoping that Canon was going to release something very similar to this at the time. Obviously, it's 2.5 years later, they're finally getting around to it. But anyways, it's going to be the new flagship mirrorless camera. Specs-wise, they have released a few things on their website, and this isn't all rumor stuff. This is directly from Canon's website, a lot of these specs that I'm going to be talking about. So let's go into some of them. First things first, it's going to be a full frame sensor, obviously, but more than that, it's going to be a brand new sensor and a brand new processor. They've stated that on the website. So that's kind of interesting to see. Obviously some gains there with regards to probably some low light performance and ISO and all that. But new sensor, new processor, so that's interesting to see. Beyond that, they're talking about 12 frames per second mechanical shutter and 20 frames per second silent shutter. So that's interesting to see, considering that really that's not too much different than the Sony a7 III, the a7R III, R4, A9, A9 II, and those were all released a couple years ago. So it's interesting to see that. And that's it as far as specs or features from a stills camera side. That's really all they've really announced so far. Everything else about this camera and the features that have really been getting the most hype have really been all video centric. So let's dive into those. So the first thing is going to be 8K. That's kind of the one thing that's really been getting a lot of attention. So they're saying that this camera is going to be doing 8K, and when the rumors first came out about 8K and the R5, a lot of people, and myself included, were assuming that that was going to be like a time-lapse mode that was going to stitch together a movie for you, or it was going to be something that just had an absolutely massive crop. Now, Canon's come out in the last couple of days. They've released a new update to these features, and they've basically tried to dispel some of those myths. And they're apparently saying that this is going to be a legit video recording mode, and they're saying that the R5 is going to be it's going to have a legit 8K recording mode, and it's going to do 8K internal, no crop, and it's going to be able to do 8K up to 30 frames per second. So that's pretty wild, and that's definitely very impressive. It's definitely very interesting to see Canon kind of taking a little bit of a massive step on the video front. They really have been, compared to all the other brands out there, they've really held back on the video end of things more so than most of the other brands, in terms of only doing like 720 for 120 frames per second, that sort of thing. So it's definitely cool to see them taking a big step forward there. Moving on to 4K, they're saying 4K is going to be the same thing, no crop. It's going to be 4K, full width of the sensor, no crop, 422 10-bit internal, and not just 4K 30 frames per second, but also 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second in 4K. So that is very, very cool. And again, a huge departure from what Canon's really been doing in really for the last, I can't remember how long. All their cameras that have had 4K have always had some pretty serious limitations in terms of crop or codec or whatnot. So that's very interesting to see. And something else they've mentioned too is that both 4K and 8K will both have full functionality of their dual pixel autofocus. Again, something that wasn't necessarily the case in some of their previous releases. So again, very cool to see that. Moving on my list here, the next thing that they've talked about is in-body image stabilization. And this sounds like it's going to be, for the first time, like actual on-sensor image stabilization, whereas in the past, Canon's definitely had some stabilization on their cameras, but it's all been digital. So they basically just crop into the image and then adjust it digitally. This is sounding like it's going to be actual on-sensor image stabilization. And on top of that, they're saying that it can be combined with in-lens image stabilization. So you're going to get some additional stops of stabilization that way. So that's pretty cool to see as well. Moving on, we've got dual memory cards on the R5. Again, something a lot of Canon users have been waiting for and were a bit disappointed when the EOS R came out and only had one memory card slot. Now, I know there's plenty of people who don't care about two cards, but there's a lot of people, like myself included, who do weddings and really do appreciate having that redundancy to write to two cards. So that's going to be a big upgrade for a lot of people. And also on the dual memory card front, they're saying that it's going to have a CF Express and a UHS 2 card slot. So those are going to be how that breaks down. So definitely should be some good speeds on the cards there for clearing the buffer. So that's cool. Now the last thing on my list here, and it's not something that officially put on their website as a bullet point. If you look at the sample images on their website, it shows that it is going to have a tilty, flippy, it's going to have a tilty, flippy screen just like the EOS R and the RP. So that's also very interesting to see, and that's a feature I know for Sony that I've been wanting to have that they haven't quite included just yet. Hell, that's even a feature that Fuji users didn't necessarily seem to want, but they got it anyway on the X-T4. So that's also very cool to see. Now, some things that they haven't mentioned on their website directly, but I think that we can assume to see in this camera is going to be obviously the most up-to-date version of their iDetect AF. Also, I think we'll see just in general a very good autofocusing system, if not the same system from the 1DX Mark III, then something very close to it, brought down into the R5. Also, I'm expecting to see a very good, high-quality, top-tier viewfinder placed into the R5. Again, this is going to be their flagship mirrorless camera, so I don't expect them to skimp there. So all around on paper, this definitely sounds like it's going to be a very excellent camera. So barring any sort of last-minute changes or weird surprises like the 8K and the 4K features are going to be something where you've got to send the camera back into Canon and have it added in as a paid ad feature, or weird reliability issues or something along those lines. Barring any unforeseen weird things like that, this definitely sounds like it's going to be a fantastic camera. On the still side, I'm sure it's going to produce amazing images. It's going to do a great job there. And on the video side, it definitely sounds like it's very well stacked, and this camera should be fairly well future-proof for anybody who picks it up. I would imagine that if you were to buy this camera, it'll probably be good for you in your work for at least 5 or 6 years, if not longer than that, depending on how picky you are about having the most up-to-date and latest and greatest features. So yeah, it definitely sounds like it's going to be a fantastic camera. So that leads me to the next part. It's a fantastic camera, but is it going to be something that is going to be revolutionary? Is it going to be something that's really going to crush Sony and Fuji and Nikon and bring everybody who left Canon back over to Canon? My thought on that is I don't think it's going to be. If we back up a little bit and we really look at this camera and what it is, if you look at it from just the still side, like I said a minute ago, it's going to be a great camera. It's going to produce amazing images. There's no doubt about that. But it's not really revolutionary on the still side. You're talking 12 frames per second mechanical shutter, 20 frames per second silent shutter. Again, these are specs that the A7 III and the A7 R3 were doing like 2.5 years ago. Nothing really mind-blowing there. The sensor and the processor is going to be new, so that means it's probably going to have a little bit of an advantage in maybe low light and ISO performance, but it's probably not going to be anything too groundbreaking or super noticeable. And then other than that, guys, I mean, yeah, it's going to have a benefit in terms of a faster CF Express card and better ergonomics in some ways over the Sony or even maybe the Nikon or the Fujis, but it's not going to be anything that I think is super revolutionary from a stills photography standpoint. Looking at it myself as primarily a still shooter, this is definitely not a camera that really is giving me that much interest to want to switch over from Sony to Canon. Like I don't imagine myself wanting to do that. Now from a video standpoint, if you're somebody who does a lot of video, I could see some people who do video who are very heavy on the video production side of things potentially wanting to move back over to Canon if that's where they came from, or even if they didn't and they're just looking for the latest and the greatest, the Canon EOS R5 could be it for a lot of people. I know a lot of people who do shoot 4K footage, and it bugs them that they can't have their slow-mo footage match their 4K 24, their 4K 30 footage. So for those types of people, this might be the right camera for them to switch over to if it makes sense financially and it really does matter that much to their workflow. Now, for new people just getting into full-frame cameras or photography in general, then I could definitely see this camera pulling in those new people and dragging them towards the Canon side. But I think for people who are already established with their brands, whether that's Nikon or Sony or Fuji or whoever else, I don't really honestly see this being a camera that's really going to pull a ton of people over to the Canon side like the A7 III did for Sony. On top of that, I will mention that they haven't made any sort of price announcements on this camera, but I don't think this is going to be a $2,000 body like the A7 III was. I think this is going to be, realistically, it's going to be priced more along the lines of a 5D Mark IV. It's going to be a $3,500 body. Or given some of these video specs and how similar they are to something like a Panasonic SH1, this might even be a $4,000 body. Now, there's some people saying that it might be like $6,000, like a 1DX Mark III. I don't think it's going to be that high. I think it's going to be like a $3,500 to $4,000 body, but that being said, I do foresee this camera doing very, very well for Canon. I think a lot of Canon shooters who are already on the Canon brand are absolutely going to be compelled to want to pick this up and finally move into the RF lens lineup and go down that mirrorless route. But for everybody else with other brands, I don't think we're going to see a mass exodus of people leaving Sony, Fuji, whoever, to go over to Canon. It's going to be, like I said, a fantastic camera. I'm not trying to downplay that, or I'm not trying to say that this is going to be a bad camera. I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a fantastic piece of gear. I just don't think it's going to do what a lot of people in the comments are saying it's going to do and completely crush Nikon and Sony and drag people back over into the Canon fold. But that's just my thoughts on the matter. I would be interested in getting my hands on this camera when it comes out. I would love to go and take it out for a couple shoots and play with it and get a feel for it and see what kind of images it does produce or what type of video it does produce. But other than that, guys, that's my thoughts on this camera. I think it's going to be great. I'm so happy to see Canon finally catching up to Sony in a lot of regards, and Nikon for that matter, and Fuji for that matter in some regards. So I think this is only going to do great things for the camera industry as a whole. And given all the complications we've had with 2020 so far, it's cool to have something like this that's very interesting and very exciting to be coming out and giving people some sort of something to be excited about, something to be happy about here in 2020. So nonetheless, guys, that's going to be it for everything I really wanted to cover on this video. Those are my thoughts on whether or not this is really going to be a Sony killer or a Nikon killer, or Fuji killer, whatever. I would be interested to know your guys' thoughts. Is this a camera that you think you're gonna pick up? Are you a Sony shooter currently? Are you a Canon shooter, Nikon, Fuji, whatever you are? Is this something that's gonna drag you back over to Canon? Or if you're with Canon, is this gonna get you to finally be convinced to stay with them? I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that. And one last closing thought I do wanna say is, with regards to the EOS R5, and it is a great camera, one thing I will say is, you know, whether you love Sony or you hate Sony, what I will say is I don't think that this camera would have ever existed had Sony not been the player in the field that it has been over the last 5 or 6 years. Had Sony not come along, I honestly don't believe that Canon would have ever produced this camera. And for that matter, I don't think Nikon would have ever produced the Z6 or the Z7. So whether you love Sony or you hate them, I think you do owe them at least a little bit of credit for being able to get this camera into your hands. And so that's all I'm going to say about that. Anyways, guys, if you found the video at least somewhat entertaining or whatever, I don't know, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button twice. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, again, whether or not you think this is a camera you're going to buy. Any other questions or comments, leave them down below. And other than that, guys, subscribe if you want to. And until next time, stay safe, keep shooting. Catch you in the next one. Peace.